After crossing over to become Ludi because there is a god in this world. And this god also has a considerable hostility towards him. Ludi, I'm a bit flustered in my heart. But fortunately, he has traveled through time and possesses the power of immortality. Not dead. It means he can do many extraordinary things. In order to avoid being sealed by God and persecuting one's own loved ones, Ludi decided to launch the Mushroom Project. Take the lead and seal the opposite divine mansion first. The first phase of the Mushroom program involves growing mushrooms in vitro. The second phase of the Mushroom plan involves planting mushrooms inside the body. Mushroom Plan Phase 3 IIIFeilu novel network reminds you that this novel and its characters are purely fictional. If there are any similarities, they are purely coincidental and should not be imitated. 001 Undead Ludi. You are listening at novel full.audio. Slowly open your eyes. Ludi frowned and looked at the excited blonde man in front of him. Seeing the other person approaching me directly and strongly resisting, he lifted his hands and pushed out. Believe that as long as it is a normal man. Facing a man with a scruffy beard and an excited face, he rushed forward. I'm afraid my inner self is very unwilling to accept it. But after Ludi's hands pushed out this surprising discovery, my own hands have turned into so small and so small. And by my side, a beautiful blonde woman is sitting there. Looking at myself with a weak yet gentle face, but I have to say it. This beautiful woman having these two terrifying weapons is daunting. He has traveled. Unconsciously in the blink of an eye, 3 years have already passed. Between 3 years, Ludi has fully understood the world he is in. A jobless reincarnation world. This is the world of an anime he has watched in his past life. And he became the protagonist in the story Ludi. One participated in the activity of sealing human gods because of their own child. And after being predicted by humans and gods in advance several steps ahead, directly take action to kill the parents of the child, to avoid being sealed by the gods themselves. People, being targeted by gods. The result was destined to be tragic. At first, after learning about this matter, Ludi, also filled with fear. But fortunately after crossing over, he gained the power of immortality. That is to say, he himself would never be killed. But if you don't die, you can also seal it. So in order to avoid being messed with, he had to deal with the human god in advance. Ludi was not an indecisive person in his previous life. In 3 years he had already secretly read all the magic books his mother held. And today, it's him who has truly started developing his own magic. After talking to my mother, Ludi, he ran straight out. Found a remote location using wind magic to charge oneself towards what was already found, that desolate wasteland of one person. Pop. Landing, stand still. Glancing around, seeing that nothing exists will disturb his understanding of new magic. Ludi, I began to explore and create a small ball of water and a small ball of fire. At the same time a small group of wind elements combined with fire elements, forming a spiral, constantly rotating around that small ball of water. Each rotation, they will shake that small ball of water into ripples. Then he started, constantly compressing, and compressing again. At the beginning, Ludi, you can still control it well. 3 magic elements that can vary in size with the human head. He kept compressing it to the size of his fist, until it reached the size of his fingertips. Everything seems to have entered another class. The originally satisfactory control. In an instant, it became exceptionally difficult. A sudden situation let Ludi lose control, causing the extremely concentrated 3 series elements burst out suddenly. Boom boom. Within a range of over 10 meters. Filled with a multitude of steam and electric sparks. Strong temperature. Directly burning Ludi's entire body, leaving only a bone in an instant. Pang. A bone rack, falling to the ground. The high heat steam around me makes it sizzling and oily. Unconsciously when time slowly passes and everything cools down. The original bone frame has bloomed with new flesh and blood. It's just 3 seconds. Ludi, resurrected. Because it's not the first time I've been resurrected. So Ludi, who was already familiar with him, recalled the strange image without any hesitation. Just now, seemed to have reached a bottleneck. But I have to say, even if it's just after reaching the bottleneck, the blooming effect also has a good effect. In an instant, the high temperature evaporated my flesh and blood. What will happen if we continue to move forward? Restored Ludi, not only has chi and blood been restored, but the magic is also full. So with a hopeful mood. According to the situation just now. Ludi, start trying to touch that unknown bottleneck for the second time. But it's a pity. Not long after boom. Another explosion. As the highly scorching steam and purple electric flowers bloom. Ludi, once again turned into a bone rack. The second time, it failed. One afternoon's time speak long and speak short. Ludi, after being evaporated more than 10 times. I finally found some feelings. But unfortunately time is not enough for him to continue playing. She shook her head with some regret. Give a wave of your hand. The whole body is directly supported by wind elements. Flying towards home quickly, time slowly passes by 3-year-old Ludi, after demonstrating his excellent magical talent to his parents. While waiting for the teacher to arrive. Every day basically, they will die dozens of times in that remote wilderness. But it has to be said. Magic that burns with life. Mastering it means being fast. By constantly trying and making mistakes. After almost all possibilities were tried by Ludi. That unknown bottleneck. Finally, he succeeded in breaking through. The 3 elements of human head size. Successfully compressed to half the size of a fingertip by him. But unfortunately, the second bottleneck has appeared. And at the same time the magic teacher that Ludi's parents are looking for. At this moment, he also came to Ludi's face. 002 Show Magic. You are listening at novel full.audio. Tie 2 big blue ponytails. A person who looks extremely pure and lovely, holy level, water magic teacher Loki. Standing quietly beside Ludi. Curiously asked, Ludi, right? Nodding, Ludi politely smiled and said, yes, teacher Loki. Although Luo Chishi felt that a child only 3 years old, I definitely don't have any knowledge about magic. Most of it is still the expectations of parents. The demand for hiring a magic teacher has just been raised. But since it has already arrived, so, Luo Chishi plans to teach the 3-year-old child in front of him well. Of course, if the other party really doesn't have any magical talent, then she is at a loss. Nodding, Luo Chishi whispered, let me first tell you about the wizard strength stage. The wizards in this world from the beginning to the final stage of strength. They are junior, intermediate, superior, holy, king, emperor, and divine. There are a total of 7 stages, but most people have basically reached the limit of their superiors. There are actually very few beings who can reach the holy level. Besides, magic. Listening to Luo Chishi's detailed introduction of magic, Ludi gently patted the bamboo pole beside him. Teacher, I know all the basic information about magic. When you came, you said you were a holy level water magician, right? Glancing at Ludi, Luo Chishi sighed and said, you want to truly see magic. Okay. Next, let me show you the simplest water polo magic, so, remember to look carefully. Lifting the staff, just as Loki aimed at the saplings in the yard. Ludi smiled and said, teacher, don't aim at the saplings. That's my mother's treasure. Ah. Upon hearing these words, Luo Chishi quickly aimed the water ball magic at the open space. After reciting a not too short magical spell. A palm-sized water ball. Launched by Luo Qishi. But the next moment. A water ball, later served first. Directly used the water ball magic sent by Loki to forcefully smash it. He widened his eyes. Luo Qixi turned around in disbelief. Slowly put down your hand, Ludi. Seeing this, Ludi also smiled and said, Teacher. For basic magic, I have basically mastered it. So, please come here to learn from you. Intermediate or above magical knowledge. Also, I wonder if you have a higher level of magical knowledge. Upon hearing Rudi say so, Luo Qishi felt a bit confused for a moment. 3 years old, this is 3 years old. At the age of 3, can you directly master intermediate magic? You know, many people when I was old, I was just an intermediate magician. Take a long breath of turbid air. Loki, who was somewhat unwilling to accept defeat in her heart, curiously asked, what kind of knowledge do you want to know? Ludi smiled and said, how to better coordinate with elements. How to better compress the form and properties of elements, how to better and quickly activate a magic, how to better transform active magic into passive magic. Speaking, Ludi waited for a response from Loki. Squatting down directly, he pressed his hands on the soil. The next moment, a nearly 2-meter-long cylindrical barrel was erected. Then, with a loud roar, burning huge shells. Immediately, it flew out with a loud bang. In an instant, the mound several hundred meters away bombed into a pitch-black pile of broken earth. Zalala, release your hand and throw the broken barrel aside. Ludi smiled and widened his eyes, looking at Loki, who was several hundred meters away, and said with a smile, just like before, I mixed earth magic and fire magic together. Then, a certain explosive effect was created. But due to the compression ratio, a very good combination was not found. The resulting power is only so unsatisfactory. Listen to Ludi's words. Luo Qishi felt that his heart had been severely hit. The mixed magic just now. Moreover, it can be quickly used without chanting. The little guy in front of me relying solely on self-developed magic. I already have almost holy level strength. And at the same time Father Paul, who was startled by the explosion just now. And his mother Sanis, the maid Lilia, quickly walked out of the room and ran out. Firstly, teacher, what were you doing just now? Asked his mother Sanis to Loki. Rocky was startled by her mother's voice. The response was delayed by half a beat and there was no time to respond. Ludi was the first to step forward and say, Mother. The magic I just used was mine. Sanis looked bewildered and said, Ah. Paul looked bewildered and said, Ah. Lilia also had an incredulous expression on her face, staring at Ludi with wide eyes. Turn around, glancing, hundreds of meters away. That pile of broken earth still emitting white smoke. Looking back at Ludi, who was blooming with a bright smile. For a moment in everyone's hearts, there are really 5 flavors mixed together. After taking a deep breath, Mother Sanis frowned and asked, Ludi, why did you create such dangerous magic? Ludi said seriously, I heard my mother tell me many stories before. I also heard my father tell me many stories. The more I listen, the more I feel if you want to avoid being bullied, you must make yourself strong. Whether for oneself or for one's family. Only by becoming stronger can one and their family avoid being bullied. Only by becoming strong can one and their family live the life they want. So, that's why I developed this kind of magic. Although it is very dangerous, I must have it. I may not use it, but I cannot use it when it is truly necessary. No. 003 Learning Magic. You are listening at Novel Full.Audio. To be honest, what Rudi is saying at this moment. For those who have experienced a lot. It's really, really real. To avoid being bullied, one needs to get more. So naturally, we must make ourselves stronger than others. Although this is an understanding that everyone has. But for a 3-year-old child who has never experienced pain, surprisingly, being able to realize this. It's really amazing. Between the emotions in my heart, Mother Sanis couldn't help but have tears in her eyes. Step forward and tightly embrace Ludi's weak 3-year-old body. And Luo Chishi, who was originally planning to quit her teaching job. These words also stirred up emotions in my heart. This 3-year-old child, what exactly did you experience? Although Ludi said, he only listened to his father and mother's words. Then, there was such an awakening. But in Loki's heart, but he suspected that Ludi might have encountered some terrible event. But very sensible Ludi. I did not explain it to my parents. Just pinning this matter down in my own young heart. But also with this inspired Ludi to strive for learning. Strive to master the power of stronger magic. Sigh. At the age of only 3, one has experienced unimaginable things. Looking at that serious expression, it's really heartbreaking. Father Paul, with a light sigh, he stepped forward and touched Ludi's forehead. In my heart, I am also doubting whether Ludi has encountered something. However, Ludi's magical talent is really amazing. Relatively. In terms of swordsmanship, it's not very good. Is it? Do you really want Ludi to give up swordsmanship and learn magic? Ludi raised his hand and opened Paul's rough big hand. Gently embracing his mother Sanis, he smiled and said, "Don't worry, mother. In the future, I will take good care of you and guarantee with my life, Ludi." Upon hearing these words, Sanis couldn't help but cry again. But Paul laughed and said, "Hey kid, don't forget my father." Looking up at Paul, Ludi smiled and said, "Father himself is so powerful, I believe he can take good care of himself." Upon hearing these words, Paul's smile froze. On the contrary, it's other people I couldn't help but grin. And seeing everyone laughing, Paul couldn't help but laugh foolishly for a moment. Take a deep breath. Mother Sanis wiped away the tears from the corners of her eyes. Stand up and hold Ludi's hand. Turning to Luo Chishi, he said, "Next, our child will trouble the teacher. However, before that, let's have a meal and get to know each other. It's also a celebration of teacher Loki's arrival, hey." Luo Kixi panicked and said with some embarrassment, "That. I'm really a bit embarrassed, I haven't prepared anything to reciprocate." Sanis smiled and waved his hand. "What are you talking about? Come on." Speaking Sanis, hold on to Loki and Ludi directly. Quickly walked into the room. And Maid Lilia and Father Paul naturally followed closely behind. At night everyone happily held the welcome ceremony for teacher Luo Chishi. Unconsciously. It's already the second day. When Ludi sits at the dining table eating, but when I saw teacher Luo Chishi, I actually stood opposite him with a black eye circle. I couldn't help but wonder and ask, "Teacher, didn't you sleep well last night?" Upon hearing this, Mother Sanis also approached with concern. Worried, he asked, "Why, did yesterday's bedding and blankets not meet my expectations?" Quickly shaking her head, Luo Chishi whispered, Actually, after seeing Ludi's abilities yesterday, I also pondered on Ludi's question all night. So, that's why I didn't sleep well and made you worried." Nodding, Ludi asked eagerly, "So, does the teacher have an answer?" Luo Chishi confidently replied, "Yes, there is already a certain answer." Ludi grinned and nodded eagerly. And seeing Ludi's smile, Luo Chishi, however, inexplicably hit a cold cicada. Although what Ludi said yesterday was very touching for her. But after a day, looking back. At the age of 3, Ludi has already acquired the strength of a holy level wizard. I have already stood at the same height as her. The only thing missing it is a more detailed understanding of higher level magic theories. I don't know how much she can teach here. Half a month. Or a month. Sigh. I won't be able to teach anymore. We still need to consider and look for other jobs. My heart is so tired. Soon after finishing breakfast, Luo Kixi took Ludi out of the door. Start a little bit, teaching holy level magic knowledge. And based on this, take the question Ludi asked yesterday as the goal. Continuously infer and move forward. Unconsciously half a day has passed. After dinner, in the afternoon. After the two of them come out again, Luo Qishi asked Ludi, how about the knowledge mentioned this morning? Can you understand it? Nodding, Ludi smiled and said, I understand. Let me explain my understanding and let the teacher see if there are any issues. Luo Qixi responded and looked at Ludi with great anticipation. 1 year after 004. You are listening at novel full.audio. Glancing at Loki with an expectant expression on her face. Ludi spoke directly and said, turn magic from active to passive. The most important thing is the prevention of contact methods. For example, when we encounter warcraft or enemies. Through our consciousness and cognition, we recognize the identity of the other party. Afterwards, corresponding magic attacks will be carried out on this. Through teacher Luo Qishi's statement this morning, I have found that creating sprites through elements can also achieve this. Place the elf on oneself at the same time, set it to a certain touch mode. As long as the corresponding conditions are met, it can be triggered directly. In this way, the effect of turning initiative into passivity can be achieved. Even if I walk alone in the wilderness, as long as you have elf guards, you can rest with peace of mind. Additionally, you can also use sprites to pre-set some elements. Accelerate the casting speed of the entire spell if you want it to be faster. You can also create corresponding magical tools. Under the superposition of two phases, it should increase the entire magic activation rate by a significant amount. Meanwhile, elves can be used as units for storing magical elements. Even elves can be considered as the result of executing magic. Make elves into powerful explosive shells. In such a situation, it is even faster to increase the casting speed. There is even one way elves can be used to create an unexecuted stage where magic is about to be cast. With just one command, you can directly activate the elves to use magic. As Ludi spoke out one idea after another. The mood that Loki was originally eagerly anticipating, gradually, it became more and more frightening. Because she discovered many of Ludi's ideas, although very imaginative. But many directions can truly be implemented. Of course, this is not the real reason that scared her. Truly zero Loki's fear, in fact, it is all the directions studied by Ludi. All for the sake of causing maximum damage to enemies faster. No need to go to the extreme. As long as there is a way, as long as it can defeat the enemy. Even if the method used is dirty, it will not be rejected by Ludi. If Ludi applies these methods to the enemy, there should be no problem. But if Ludi apply these to innocent beings, that will be a terrifying scene where all living beings are devastated. Thinking of this, Luo Qixi couldn't help but worry and asked, Ludi, you have a strong aristocratic heritage. In the future you will have a high possibility of facing conflicts between countries and races. So, what do you think about this matter? Watching Loki's worried expression, Ludi smiled and said, is the teacher worried that I will kill innocent people indiscriminately? Actually, teachers don't need to have such extreme thoughts. To be honest, if it weren't for what the teacher said, I wouldn't have thought of such an extreme thing. I can only talk about the specific actions when the time comes. But I also know the power of magic. I can tolerate it, and I am not someone with a very bad temper. But if it's just that the other person is going too far, then I won't tolerate it either. Because my bottom line has always been my family. Watching Ludi's extremely serious gaze, Luo Qishi nodded lightly and said, I hope you can keep your promises. Nodding, Ludi smiled and said, since the teacher has requested it, I will naturally do it. Actually, Luo Qishi sighed, you are qualified not to call me teacher. Your ability greatly exceeds my upper limit. I believe your future achievements will greatly exceed my expectations. Shaking his head, Ludi stepped forward and took Loki's hand. With a smile, he said, then let's be teachers to each other, okay? Teacher Luo Qishi, teach me the knowledge of saint-level wizards. I'll teach you how to use non-chanting magic, okay? Pursed her lips, Loki looked at Ludi with a serious expression on her face. To be honest, what she has always accepted is that she needs to sing in order to use magic. If you really don't need to sing, you can use magic. Her strength will also be greatly enhanced. At this moment, Luo Qishi was really tempted. But looking at Ludi, who was only 3 years old in front of me, I couldn't help but feel a slight hesitation. But Ludi, he didn't care about these. But directly, with a smile, began to recount the detailed details of the non-chanting magic. See here. Loki felt grateful in her heart. After saying thank you, I listened attentively. In the blink of an eye. Unconsciously, a year has passed. 3-year-old Ludi also grew up to be 4-year-old Ludi. Luo Qishi also gradually mastered some methods of non-singing magic. And together with Ludi developed some very interesting magic. On the vast grasslands Ludi stood there, quietly watching Loki, who was using non-chanting magic with her eyes closed. Give a wave of your hand. Wind elements are transformed into airflow. Quickly interweaving around Luo Qishi's body for a while. Take Loki's originally flat clothes. Everything that was blown up flipped upwards. And the affected Loki opened her eyes looking at Ludi with a speechless expression. What are you doing? Ludi smiled and asked, Teacher Luo Qishi, were you packing up last night? Let out a sigh. Luo Qishi whispered, you heard me. Nodding, Ludi smiled and said, I not only heard it, but also saw it. Speaking Ludi raised his hand and summoned a red elemental elf. Teacher Luo Qishi, your room lighting is completely taken care of by her. With a furrowed brow, Luo Qishi said in silence, so. You can see every word and action I say in the room, right? 005 Molecular Level Magic. You are listening at novel full.audio. Pop. Ludi snapped his fingers. Yes, Teacher Luo Qishi is still so smart, he said with a smile upon hearing this. Luo Qishi sighed silently, your way of praising others. It's really easy to get angry, why do you treat me like this? Ludi smiled and said, because I like teachers. Glancing at Ludi, Luo Qishi snorted, I hope in 10 years. When we meet, you will also say the same to me. Nodding, Ludi responded earnestly, okay, then let's make an agreement, Teacher Luo Qishi. Luo Qishi clenched her wand in her hand with some displeasure. But thinking of myself, it seems that I can't beat the 4-year-old child in front of me. Can only be helpless, let out a sigh. Who would have thought she is a powerful wizard who has been promoted from the holy level to the king level? Surprisingly, even a 4-year-old child cannot be defeated at all. Ludi stepped forward and gently held Luo Qishi's hand. Pulling the other person, he sat on the soft, slightly hard green grass. With a serious apology on his face, he said, Teacher Luo Qishi, I'm sorry to have seen you for so long. It's okay, I've already seen it, haven't I? Luo Qishi sighed helplessly. Hee, thank you, teacher, for forgiving me. Actually, I should also thank you for giving me the opportunity to cast spells without singing. Teacher Luo Qishi, can you tell me the reason why you are leaving? With a sigh, Loki lowered her head and looked at the small 4-year-old blonde boy in front of her. To be honest, she has been very happy this year. But at the same time, she is also very conflicted. If only she were a little more knowledgeable. Ludi, he is really a very talented child. But she herself did not have a matching academic background. To be honest, a year's time. Luo Qixi has completely emptied herself of all that is left. Even if it continues, that's just two ignorant people speculating about the world. This kind of thing is something that Loki really dislikes. So this time, her idea of leaving is very firm. She wants to become more knowledgeable and learn more about magic. Lift the other hand, gently stroking Ludi's forehead. Luo Qishi sighed and said, I have really been emptied by you. Nodding, Ludi smiled and said, can we at least stay one more day? After I go back later, I will tell my parents. At the very least, we need to give Teacher Luo Qishi some practice. Faced with Ludi's serious gaze, Loki nodded lightly. Okay, thank you, he said with a smile. He smiled and Ludi leaned over to Loki's side, gently sniffing the other person's fragrant breath at the tip of the nose. Seeing that the other party did not resist, he did not make any progress. Just fall on the other person's knee like this. Smiling, they talked to each other about the future with Luo Chishi. At night when Ludi returned home and finished talking about Loki to his parents, received a response from parents. He pushed open the window. The wind element is at your feet, slowly pushing forward. The whole person quickly rushed towards the distant wilderness. And shortly after Ludi rushed out, a light blue figure also quickly charged towards Ludi's direction. 2 people in front and 1 behind. Arrived in the wilderness and Ludi pretended not to notice the other person's appearance. Coming a pitch black, dry, and nearly 1 meter deep underground huge pit. This it's his masterpiece of over a year. Use your own death to experiment with the magic that best suits you. If calculated based on an average of 50 deaths per day. Until today he should have died thousands of times. To be honest. Death, at first I was quite afraid. But if you die, you're not very afraid anymore. Standing in the pit. Ludi's mind twitched. Physically, it feels like a system of 6 programmed elemental sprites. Let's work hard together with him. In an instant. Refine the steel plate from the body. Transformed into a layer of black streamlined armor infused with magic. Full coverage type, leaving no gaps. And then his hands slowly extended forward. And the 6 elemental elves also held hands and formed a circle. Flying in the air above his hands the next moment. The water element is all centered by the wind and fire elements. The volume of a person's head. In an instant it was compressed to a volume of 1 millimeter. A strong force constantly radiates outward. Make a trembling buzzing sound in the surrounding air. Every world has its own cosmic rules. Different from Ludi's former world, he is currently in a jobless reincarnation world. All substances are enveloped by magic. And to stimulate the core nuclear reaction, the first thing to do is to remove the magic wrapping around the nucleus. I worked hard for over a year. In addition, there are 6 pre-prepared elemental elf assistants. But even so it is also quite difficult to fully stimulate and break through the nuclear circle. Today's Ludi. At most, it can only reach the molecular layer. That is to say, he can act recklessly at the molecular level. For example, it is possible to convert water into both hydrogen and oxygen. But I want to turn water into gold. Even igniting fusion reactions within the nucleus of hydrogen atoms, he completely blinded me. The beginning and end of the 006 incident. You are listening at novel full.audio. Zalala Pi Li Pa. A molecular cluster of elements that is 1 millimeter in size. But it constantly blooms with tremendous energy reactions. A huge white arc constantly whipped the ground beneath Ludi's feet. The temperature of the entire space is also rapidly rising. 50 degrees, 60 degrees, 70 degrees when the temperature is about to rise to 80 degrees. Loki's voice, coming from a distance. Ludi, quickly throw away that thing, it's going to explode. Okay. Ludi should make the next sound. Raise your hand to summon 6 elemental spirits. Carrying this millimeter-sized cluster of elemental molecules. Quickly fly towards the sky. And Ludi himself, he also quickly rushed towards the direction where Loki spoke out. Soon. When Ludi arrived, Luo Chishi, who was looking panicked, was in front of him. Directly pressed the other person under him. 2 people fell completely to the ground. And at the same time on the night sky. A powerful and dazzling explosion came. For a moment within a range of several thousand meters around. Reflected like daylight. But fortunately, due to the location chosen by Ludi, it is quite remote. It won't have any negative impact on others. With the shock wave of the explosion waves blow over. Ludi protected Luo Qishi very well under his own body. Time slowly passes by. Soon the explosive fluctuations completely dissipate. Until then. Ludi, I just got up. Lift up the Luo Qishi underneath. Looking at the clothes on the other person, they were dyed a bit dirty and unbearable. Even on my face, it's all blackened out. I couldn't help but laugh and say, Teacher Luo Qishi, you've become a little black cat. With lingering palpitations, Luo Qishi looked up at the hollow clouds above her head. This is suddenly turning his head, he looked sternly at Ludi and said, just now, what exactly was that? Ludi smiled and said, I developed it myself, elemental bomb. Previously, I listened to Teacher Luo Qishi and told many stories about the outside world. I think my own strength is still too poor. But the energy contained in this thing is somewhat too massive. If one doesn't do it well, it's easy to have accidents. So, I'm afraid you'll worry, I'm secretly researching on my own. I hope in the future Mom and Dad, and all my cherished friends. They will not leave me helplessly because of my incompetence. I don't like to part ways, so, in order for the future, I must make myself stronger. Watching Ludi's extremely serious gaze, Luo Qishi couldn't hold back and hugged Ludi tightly. At the corner of my eye, 2 tears slowly streamed down. Ludi, can you tell me what you've experienced that made you so scared? Because I have seen the future of myself. You in the future? Yes. Actually, you also have a connection with this one. I nodded solemnly. Ludi raised his hand and released a water curtain. Then he turned to Luo Qishi seriously and said, can you watch it with me? Okay, what do you want to do? Luo Qishi looked at the water curtain in front of them with a puzzled expression on her face. The next moment. On the water screen, scenes were quickly displayed one after another. At the beginning, Ludi has just been born and lives a beautiful life with his family. Gradually, Ludi grew up. Curiously exposed to magic, therefore, after being discovered by the family with a good magical talent. I have brought in Teacher Luo Qishi. Seeing this, Luo Qishi's heart trembled as she was about to speak. But unexpectedly, Ludi held down his little hand. Wen Xing said, keep watching, teacher. Okay. Luo Qishi nodded. But as she watched the water curtain, her gaze gradually became more serious. The scene on the water screen is constantly flowing. The protagonist is Ludi. As Ludi grew older, the water curtain displayed constantly evolving events. Meeting, getting to know, and parting with Luo Qishi. Meeting, getting to know, and parting with Alice. Here all good luck and joy have come to an end. Disaster has arrived. The occurrence of the Great Migration event has led to countless people changing their destinies. And Ludi's family became fragmented as a result. Under the design of a god who enjoys playing with others, Ludi was killed by the dragon god. Although he was resurrected afterwards, but it also made Alice want to gain stronger strength and run away. Ludi, who had a mistaken idea in his heart, fell into endless dark emotions. Afterwards, I finally found my childhood sweetheart, Xilufei. But what was immediately welcomed was the death of my father. And the mother's memory has been lost. Finally, I had a good relationship with Luo Qishi. But because of the design of humans and gods, a mouse suffering from Rubik's stone disease bit onto a pregnant Loki. From then on, Luo Qishi transformed into a magic stone. As a result, Ludi was not lightly stimulated. It indirectly led to Xilufei's centrifugation and her being killed by villains. Afterwards, the only remaining mother and sister also killed by villains because there was no time for rescue. Always following Alice, who struggled to explain the misunderstanding between the two. The two have been fighting and even getting into a real fight with each other. Until Alice finally blocked Ludi's fatal blow. With a happy expression on his face, he fell into Ludi's arms. The scene on the water screen, it came to an abrupt end here. Only the lonely and pitiful figure of old Ludi remains. Watching Loki shed tears unconsciously, Ludi sighed, if I don't make any changes, then this is my future. Why? Loki couldn't understand. Grasping Ludi's arm, he cried and asked, why? Why do humans and gods treat us like this? Why? Shaking his head, Ludi raised his hand and gently caressed Loki's face. Sighing, because the dragon god was also designed by human gods to have his family destroyed and his people perished. The lifelong wish of the dragon god is to successfully defeat the killer god. Unfortunately, our two children afterwards, they will be involved in this event. After the intertwining of powerful fates finally, it bears fruit, designed by humans and gods. After taking a deep breath, Loki asked softly, our future child, have you succeeded? Nodding, Ludi sighed, yes, otherwise, why would humans and gods design us? 007 is what we did. You are listening at novel full.audio. Originally Loki, still curious about why Ludi has such an extreme mentality. But after watching the future scene just now, she completely understood. No one can accept such a tragic future. Ludi doesn't want to. And she, Loki, also doesn't want to. But a rigorous personality still, let Loki retain the most basic suspicion. Raise your head. Looking at Ludi with utmost seriousness, Luo Chishi asked curiously, did all of this come from you in the future? Looking at Loki equally seriously, Ludi said seriously, yes, it's me in the future. It was him who placed his tragic life in my hands. He said, we must seek revenge from humans and gods. So I won't force you, Master, to do something. You are a very, very important person to me. No matter what decision you make, I accept it. However, I will definitely make the greatest effort. Anyway, I will not accept the tragedy in the original trajectory. I believe that with my current relatively good magical talent, as long as you study diligently, one day, one can grow to a very strong level. Faced with Ludi's extremely serious gaze, Loki, I really hesitated. And seeing this, Ludi also did not press Luo Chishi step by step, smiling and patting the girl's hand. And then, of course, hold on to two people, under the influence of wind elements, quickly fly towards Ludi's home. And Loki turning to look at Ludi with a serious expression on his face. Her eyes couldn't help but reveal the scenes of the water curtain just now. Father died. The deaths of 3 wives. Finally, the mother and sister also died one after another. There is only one person left, a lonely and pitiful person. Is all of this really true? If it is true, what a despairing future it would be. Ludi said these are all warnings from him in the future. That old Ludi who truly experienced these things. So what's going on? Thinking of this, Luo Chishi couldn't help but ask the questions in her heart. But Ludi did not answer her. Just as Loki was curious and wanted to ask again, suddenly she was surprised to find that the surroundings suddenly changed. An elderly Ludi appeared before her eyes. What kind of gaze was that? Despair and confusion intertwine. From time to time, a sharp and intense frenzy will brew. Everywhere was covered in the scars of battle. But even so, old Ludi, he still started creating the formation. The formation of shuttle time. Once triggered, old Ludi's body is constantly being worn out. And the next moment old Ludi has reached his childhood self. At this point, old Ludi's body had already consumed 1/3. Next, Loki couldn't hear the conversation between the two. I can only see two people constantly communicating. Message after message was passed on from the old Ludi to the young Ludi. Time flies. Unconsciously old Ludi disappeared. So far the world has returned to its previous state. Beside Luo Chishi still the one, Ludi holding her hand. I can't imagine it. The immature child in front of me. In the future, I will become like that, neither human nor ghost. Why? Unable to resist, Loki couldn't help but let out a faint sigh in her heart. She no longer inquired about the truth of the matter. But he asked Ludi, next, are you going to find Alice? Looking sideways at Loki, Ludi nodded and said, I will first find Xilufei, and then find Alice. Anyway, I will try my best to fill myself, said Luo-Chishi nodding. Ludi smiled and said, how about the teacher and I find Alice and Xilufei together and leave? Glancing at Ludi, Luo-Chishi said angrily, go find it yourself. He smiled and Ludi obediently replied, okay, teacher, don't be angry. With a sigh, Luo-Chishi sighed and said, I really can't imagine it. In the future, we have gone through such unbearable things. Ludi smiled and said, but not now. I won't let the tragedy happen again. Luo-Kixi looked at Ludi's smiling face sighing, at the age of only 4, you need to carry such a heavy burden. Ludi smiled and said, teacher, I'm sorry. How about the teacher holding me to sleep tonight? Ludi gave a pale glance. When he was not angry, Loki wanted to scold, but in the end, it turned into a light smile. Being able to distinguish sadness and silence from jokes so clearly. I can't believe it, you're only 4 years old. Nodding, Ludi smiled and said, so, teacher, rest assured. For the sake of my difficulties, the teacher is also leaving tomorrow. So, tonight, I'll rest with the teacher. Okay. Glancing at Ludi, Loki wanted to refuse. But thinking about everything that Ludi carries, her maternal nature in her heart ultimately prevented her from rejecting Ludi's request. With a sigh, he nodded lightly and said, okay, but you're not allowed to do anything excessive. Nodding, Ludi smiled happily and said, okay, the teacher is really good. Looking at Ludi's smiling face, Luo-Kixi, after watching the tragedy just now, my heart finally felt better. Soon after the two of them returned home. I saw the parents who were worried about the explosion just now. Father Paul glanced suspiciously at Ludi and Loki. Did you see the explosive flash just now? Asked tentatively. Nodding, Ludi smiled and said, yes, it was the two of us who caused it. For a moment, I heard this. Everyone's gaze turned towards Ludi in surprise. 008 Xilufei. You are listening at novel full.audio. Father Paul I couldn't believe it and asked, did you two do that just now? Ludi smiled and nodded. Holding Luo-Chishi's hand, he shook it and said, it's like this. Tomorrow, Master is leaving. So before leaving, he prepared a graduation exam for me. Nodding, Father Paul smiled and said, it's okay. Mother Sanis also clasped her hands together as he prayed. He said, the violent explosion just now really gave us a big shock. However, is the graduation exam so difficult? It's really scary. Glancing at Ludi, Loki nodded. After all, Ludi himself is a very remarkable genius. So, that's why I wanted to try giving Ludi a more difficult question. I didn't expect Ludi to solve this problem very quickly. To be honest, Ludi can now say that he is even stronger than me. Father Paul chuckled and said, no matter how strong Ludi is, you are his teacher. Mother Sanis nodded and smiled, yes, but it's getting late. It's time for everyone to rest, Ludi. Ludi smiled happily and said, tonight, I will sleep with my master. Smiling and nodding, my mother Sanis didn't think much either. He said to Luo-Chishi, tonight, I'll trouble teacher Luo-Chishi. Luo-Chishi smiled and said, it's okay, actually Ludi is very obedient. Ludi also smiled and said, yes, actually I am very obedient. See this. Paul walked out of the room with Senis and Lilia. After closing the door. Amidst the flickering lights. Only the figures of Loki and Ludi remained. Master Luo-Chishi. Glancing back at Ludi. What's going on? Luo-Chishi asked as he took off his clothes. This elemental elf is for you. Speaking, Ludi took out a water elemental elf. That exquisite and lovely appearance is very pleasing to the eye. And Loki naturally fell in love with this cute water elf at a glance. Raise your hand and move under the traction of magic. Cute, finger-sized water elf. It fell into the palm of Loki's hand. The gift before parting. So what does the master want from me? I don't have anything good either, I'll give you the amulet of my hometown. While laughing, Loki took out a necklace from her backpack. Gently put it on Ludi's neck. Lowering his head, Ludi looked at the talisman of the special geometry. With a serious expression on his face, he replied, I will cherish it well. Luokixi smiled and touched Ludi's forehead, completely retracted his coat and crawled into the bed. And Ludi naturally kicked the shoes. Shaking all over my clothes, grasping tightly into Loki's bed. Although the bed is not big, but how much space can a 4-year-old child occupy? In tacit agreement, the two hugged each other and slowly fell asleep. The next day everyone prepared a sumptuous farewell banquet for Luochishi. As we bid farewell to everyone. In everyone's eyes, Loki firmly embarked on the path to the future. And the mother who is wiping away her tears. When I saw Ludi, I even had a smile on my face. I couldn't help but ask, Ludi, why aren't you sad at all? Turning back, looking at my mother Sanis. Ludi smiled and said, because I know that leaving is for future gatherings. As long as I study magic hard, I believe I will soon see my master. With a grin on his face, his father Paul couldn't help but give a thumbs up. Sure, it's quite a man's chest. Nodding, his mother Sanis also praised, my Ludi has really grown up. Listening to his parents' praise, Ludi couldn't help but burst into laughter. And seeing this mother Sanis and father Paul also together, I laughed heartily. After laughing for a while, Ludi glanced at the master, Luochishi, who had completely disappeared from sight. Laughing, he said, my master and I have been learning magic all along. Since I said goodbye to my master for the time being today, then father and mother, I want to go out and see our surroundings by myself. Nodding, his mother Sanis smiled and said, be careful on the way. Ludi smiled and said, okay, then I'll go out and take a look for myself. Waving his hand towards his parents, Ludi turned around and walked towards the outside. Xilufei, as his intended girlfriend. All along he always puts his mind entirely on the development of magic. Without specific concern for the other party's situation. But now, perhaps it's also a good time to get to know each other. I don't know if he has been with Loki for a long time. He, who is already accustomed to being alone with Loki's departure. On the contrary, there were some indescribable emotions in his heart. Shaking my head, Ludi, put aside the negative emotions in your heart. With a hopeful mood, start searching for the traces of Xilufei. Xilufei, actually, she is a girl with a very fragile heart. This is closely related to her living environment. Due to the demon bloodline within the body. She has been bullied by other children since childhood. Moving or not, let her roll back to the demon clan's side. Just as Ludi slowly recalled the information about his established girlfriend. But I don't want to suddenly hear from afar a few little boys came shouting slogans to make the demon race retreat. Is it so coincidental? Ludi was stunned for a moment. The wind element lifted his body. Quickly flying towards the direction of the sound as the distance gets closer. The voice over there has also become increasingly clear. 009 friend. You are listening at novel full.audio. Demon race, get out of our village quickly. Mo clan, if you don't leave again, don't blame us for being impolite. Go back to your demon land. Demon race, disappear. Listen to this energetic shout. 3 little boys, bullying a little girl seen. Quickly, it appeared in front of Ludi. Surprisingly, it really happened. It's quite lucky. With a sigh in my heart, Ludi appeared next to the 3 little boys in an instant. Stop it, you 3 men. Bullying a little girl is nothing, he said with a smile, turning their heads. The 3 little boys looked fiercely at Ludi, who was thin and small in stature. Shouting arrogantly, I didn't expect there to be another accomplice. Are you trying to stand up for her? As the words fell, there is a little boy next to him. Swinging his hand, he threw a dirt egg towards Ludi. Believe it, if it were thrown onto you. The originally clean clothes will become extremely dirty and disheveled. If it's an ordinary little boy perhaps, this really caught the trick. But for Ludi elements have long been a part of his life. With a movement of mind. The soil egg was thrown aside. And the three little boys were also directly imprisoned in mid-air by the wind element. In an instant. It descended above the three little boys. Looking down at the other person from a high position, Ludi smiled and asked, "Are you sure you want to be enemies with me?" Feeling the uncontrollable body. Three little boys were all scared to death. Hurry up and apologize to Ludi repeatedly. Continuously speaking, "I was wrong on my end. Please forgive them, Ludi." Originally Ludi is too lazy to see children in the same way. So, since the other party apologized. Then he naturally shook his hand and threw the other person onto the nearby grass. And then with the wind element, she placed herself next to the dirty body of Xilufei. He looked at the girl holding her head and afraid to lift it up. "They have already been cleaned up by me, get up, don't be afraid," he said with a smile. Xilufei turned her head, trembling, and astringent Ludi, who looked at him with a gentle smile on his face, whispered, "It's okay." Ludi reached out and pulled the other person up. Smiling, he said, "Stretch your head forward and I'll flush the dirty things for you." "Hey!" Xilufei was startled. The obedient person leaned his head forward. And Ludi just reached out and pulled down the other person's hood. Controlled a ball of hot water and rinsed the other person's hair. After confirming that it is clean, that's when the dirty hot water was thrown aside. Looking carefully at Xilufei in front of me. Ludi is controlling another gust of wind blow dry the other person's hair. With a smile, he said, "All right, my hair has been washed clean. If you have clothes, you can only wait until you go home and change into a clean set, thank you." After a weak reply, Xilufei can't help but ask, "Aren't you afraid when you see me?" Ludi grinned and said, "Why are you afraid? In theory, you should be scared when you see me. If those three little boys were going to attack me just now, I have 100 ways to make their lives worse than death. In that case, Xilufei was immediately frightened and recoiled. After seeing Ludi's smiling face, I pursed my lips and lowered my head with some embarrassment. My father said, "I am not a demon." Well, even if it's the demon clan, what about it? Hey! What's wrong? Looking carefully at Xilufei in front of me. Ludi smiled and said, "For me, no matter what existence it is, I always use my eyes to judge if the other party threatens the lives of me and my loved ones. Even if the other party is a human race, I will not hesitate to take action." Upon hearing these words, Xilufei nodded somewhat knowingly and said, "Thank you for saving me." Ludi smiled and said, "But saving you has also made me offend many people. In the future, I may be isolated by them. So, in the future, you can play with me, can you?" Xilufei looked up in surprise and looked at Ludi. She couldn't imagine that someone really wanted to become friends with her. At this moment, Xilufei's heart was filled with infinite excitement. So, she also has friends. Seeing Xilufei not responding, Ludi smiled again and asked, "Why, don't you want to?" Xilufei quickly shook her head. "Take 2 quick steps and follow Ludi, saying, 'Thank you.'" Ludi smiled and said, "Don't keep saying polite things. My name is Ludi, Ludius." "What's your name?" Xilufei lowered her head weakly and whispered, "Xilufei." Nodding, Ludi smiled and said, "Xilufei, that's a great name." Speaking, Ludi walked towards a big tree not far away. And Xilufei, of course, was like a little follower, following closely behind Ludi. Soon when the two of them came under the big tree, Ludi turned around and looked at Xilufei. With a smile, he asked, "I've been studying magic all along. Are you interested in magic?" "Magic?" Xilufei looked at Ludi curiously. And Ludi naturally nodded and began to tell Xilufei about magical knowledge. A lot of knowledge. It's all about reviewing the past and learning new things. Magic is no exception. Ludi began to slowly explain basic magic knowledge to Xilufei. Actually, for him it's also an opportunity to learn again. Let him understand magic again with a higher perspective. 010, I haven't put in any effort yet. You are listening at novel full.audio. Time slowly passes by soon. An afternoon has passed. After bidding farewell to Xilufei, Ludi returned to his own home. And at the doorstep, Father Paul, who looked displeased, directly questioned, "Do you know why I'm angry?" Ludi paused for a moment and asked, "Why?" Slowly approaching Ludi, Father Paul asked with an unhappy expression, "Did you hit that child in Somel?" Upon hearing this, Ludi is already clear about it. So these are the 3 little boys who were let go during the day. Tell the parents, it's up to him. With a grin on his face, Ludi asked, "So, does my father want to scold me indiscriminately?" With a raised eyebrow, Paul said coldly, "It seems that you really don't know where you're wrong." Just as Paul finished speaking, Ludi in front of him had already waved his hand. In an instant sent a wind element to Paul. A heavy impact hit Paul's chest. Paul, who cannot react directly in the future, it flew up to the wall of the house, slowly stepped forward and looked at Paul, who is struggling to get up. Ludi smiled and said, "So, let's have a fight. In this world, the strong are kings, whether right or wrong, the weak must listen to the commands of the strong. And the things of the strong are all right. So, if you hit me, I'll apologize, okay?" Upon hearing this, Paul grinned grimly and said, "Okay, that's what you said." Nodding, Ludi smiled and said, "Yes, I said, come on. Let me see how much ability is left for my father, who has always been disrespectful to me, until now." Just as Ludi finished speaking, Paul, he had already come to Ludi's side in an instant. But the next moment, just being swept away by a gust of wind element. Looking at Paul rushing back, Ludi smiled and said, "I didn't even exert force, so my father flew out. You know, I'm just using wind elements. If I add the element of fire, my father has just died." With an extremely provocative tone, Paul was very dissatisfied and swung his sword towards Ludi. But just as he was about to approach Ludi within 2 meters, a burst of flame struck Paul's face and chest fiercely. But this doesn't count as the end. Hundreds of flames impact completely surrounded Paul. Continuous impact, continuous impact, continuous impact. No matter how hard Paul tries, it is also completely unable to break through Ludi's hundreds of flame impact circles. Helplessly, my whole body was battered and torn by the impact, bleeding profusely. And at the same time Ludi also grinned beside him and said, "It seems that father is really a disciple. Over the years, I have known how to bully my mother without even knowing how to improve my abilities. I can't even beat a small 4-year-old child. I really don't know what you have to be proud of. You said your swordsmanship is amazing. Let me learn swordsmanship from you, so, could you please show me your amazing swordsmanship? I really want to see your amazing swordsmanship." Such infuriating words, Paul roared angrily, "I will show you the power of swordsmanship." Nodding, Ludi smiled and asked, "So, hurry up, what are you waiting for? To be honest, if you weren't my father, you don't know how many times you've died now, do you know? Is this your proud swordsmanship? In my opinion, it's really a mess, a mess. I don't even have the power to protect my family. If a disaster comes, you garbage. I guess I can only feel helpless and frustrated. Alcoholism, making oneself a rotten person. Complain every day about not being able, not being able, not being able. Why don't you think about why you can't do it yourself?" Listening to these words, Paul is going crazy. Ah. Continuously roaring, wanting to burst out of flames and impact. But every time Paul has a new move, they will all be very coincidentally impacted by a flame. Cut off Paul's movements directly. So no matter how hard Paul tried, he couldn't break through at all. Gradually, Paul's stamina gradually depleted. The whole person is pitch black. Like a tattered ball, it fell to the ground. And at this point Mother Sannies who heard the sound outside. I quickly opened the door and looked out. And upon seeing the vast expanse of battle marks in front of the door, Sannies asked somewhat puzzled, "Ludi, is this?" Ludi smiled and pointed to Paul on the ground. Smiling, "Mother, during the day, I saw a child bullying a little girl. So, I looked uncomfortable and went to teach the other person a lesson. But unexpectedly, the other party told their parents. Then, he came to Paul and messed with me. And Paul didn't even think much about it when I first came back. I wanted to teach me a lesson. But I'm sorry, Paul is no longer my opponent now. So, I taught him a lesson that I didn't know was right or wrong. Mother, you said I did this, right?"